Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network, Grung. I'm Asbed Bedrossian and I'm here with Hovik Manucharyan. In this Conversations on Grung episode, our guest is a longtime member of Armenia's diplomatic corps, familiar with the ins and outs of the Armenian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We hope to discuss various aspects of Armenia's foreign policy, its wins and failures, the Armenian-Azerbaijani negotiation process through the decades, as well as the lead-up and consequences of the 44-day war, and more. This episode was recorded on May 31st, 2023. So today we are joined by Ms Dziunik Aghajanian, who has served Armenia through the ranks of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and most recently as a diplomat, as Armenia's ambassador to such countries as the Netherlands, Malaysia, Indonesia. She received her education at Yerevan State University, Columbia University in New York, and Uppsala University in Sweden. Ambassador Aghajanian, welcome to the show.
Hello, Ms Aghajanian.
Should I say good evening?
Good morning, good evening.
It's good
interesting because
evening
most of our audience is in the United States. But...
Good evening in Yerevan and good morning for diaspora.
Well, Ambassador Aghajanian, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. This has been a very anticipated interview for us. And to break the ice, I wanted to, I'm sure our listeners are also interested in your diplomatic career. Since it's the first time, can you tell us a little bit more about how you entered the career of a diplomat and where your career has taken you, in your own words?
Well, thank you, first of all, for giving me the opportunity to address our audience, well, all over the world in this case. I was among the first diplomats that entered the foreign ministry when it was established in 1992. And I worked in many departments, in the legal department, in Americas, later on as the spokesperson of the foreign ministry and director of international organizations department. I have been have been posted to Washington and to New York. In New York, I was the deputy permanent representative of Armenia to the UN. And since 2011, I was posted as the first ambassador of Armenia to the Netherlands, resident ambassador, and also covering the OPCW. And from 2018, I was reposted to Indonesia, covering also Malaysia and Singapore, and also I was the ambassador to ASEAN. So I have a long career and have dealt with multiplicity of issues. So I probably was among the few diplomats that I jokingly say could be dropped into any situation and can deal with that in a short period of time.
Yes, and it is a notable achievement. And for me, it's sad because you're talking to us not formally as an ambassador, and we'll talk a little bit more about the reasons for that. Also, we're very interested. I mean, you've had, as you say, a long history at the MFA. What can you tell us about some influential or some impactful moments at the MFA as it grew essentially from zero to an organization that represents our country externally? Who were some of your mentors, diplomats, and who impressed you the most?
Well, there were several people, I would say, that impressed me most throughout my career. And one of the few was, I don't remember, I think people living in the US and that have dealt with our embassy in Washington, D.C. was Garnik Nanagoulian. I don't know how many of the people nowadays remember him, but he was one of the most influential people for me because he moved from the Soviet foreign ministry to serve our independent country. And the knowledge that he brought and the experience that he brought from the well-established foreign ministry of the Soviet Union was exceptionally valuable because it simply gave me the understanding that there is nothing impossible to be achieved if you work correctly and if you organize your work. So that was kind of the door opener for me and the understanding the world in the sense that diplomat, if they can do whatever they put as a purpose for them and work consistently and in a principled manner to achieve it, they will definitely achieve it. So that was a door opener. The other person that was influential for me was, of course, the foreign minister Vartan Oskanian, with whom we started working at the foreign ministry almost at the same time with a week difference. And the way we organized our work there with the full participation of all the diplomats in all the areas that foreign ministry was covering, and the institutionalization of the foreign ministry as such was actually carried out during his tenure as foreign minister of Armenia. And the way the negotiation process of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict was going in his period when he was the main negotiator, and me as part of the team for about 2 years, it gave a totally different understanding of how things work, how you can achieve your goals, what kind of argumentation and in what manner you can use, etc., etc., etc. So he is one of the most influential ones, as we see as part of the whole development in my career. The other person that I can definitely mention was Mr. Kirakosyan, Arman Kirakosyan, who gave me the full understanding of the genocide policies and how things worked with whole development and historical development and the diplomatic development of the issue. And that was another aspect that was very, very influential. And I would like to mention also Jivan Tabibian. I don't know whether you remember him or not. He was our ambassador to Austria, Vienna, covering the OSCE at the time. And he actually came from the US. And the way he would organize his speech, the way he would organize the positioning of Armenia and Armenia's issues was a totally different approach, and it showed how effective it could be and how useful it could be if you would use the tools he would use and the knowledge he would use, the immense knowledge that he came. So that was another person that you would like to see around you as mentors, as people who would simply guide you and teach a lot of manners and ways and positions and I don't know, just pass their knowledge, their skills and knowledge. This is as simple as it is, just being by them, the way you would consult with him, the way he would consult with you, irrespective of your age and the difference. That was very useful and that was very knowledgeable. So I would just simply mention those four as part of my, I would see in different manners, in different periods as mentors and people who I really appreciated working with, and I learned a lot.
That's very interesting. And I know we're going to go more into foreign affairs and politics later in the show, but since you mentioned genocide policy, I wanted to dive deep a little bit more into that because that seems to be a very prescient topic. Because just today, Zareh Sinanyan, the High Commissioner for Diaspora Affairs, announced that Armenia's strategy or quest for genocide recognition has been fulfilled and completed. What has been the approach towards genocide recognition in the past? And I'm really interested because Turkey recently has been very forceful and aggressive in demanding Armenia to remove anything about the Armenian genocide off of its agenda, even including demanding removal of monuments in Armenia. What made Armenia successful in the past, where Turkey was not very actively publicly threatening Armenia or speaking out against it as much as compared to today? Is it our weakness because we lost the 2020 war, or is there more to it? Is it a matter of policy? What can you tell us about that?
Well, it is a matter of policy, and it's ironical that such a statement is coming from the special representative for genocide, As you remember, one of the first things that this current administration has done upon coming to power was just dissolution of the Ministry of Diaspora, and as part of it also was the policy of minimizing recognizing the importance of the policy of the recognition of genocide and the pursuance of it in international arena, be it on bilateral relations or in international organizations. I would state that having been in the foreign ministry since 92, so I have seen all the developments coming and going, all the presidents coming and going and the policies being pursued, that the main thing that guaranteed the success of our policies upon recognition of the Armenian genocide was first raising it to the state level, that the state was pursuing it as part of its foreign policy,
Right.
and being very persistent in our actions. And the third component was cooperation with diaspora organizations and the lobby groups in pursuance of the issue. So that was, I would say, the formula for success. Because as currently is being attempted to be carried out, the issue is being thrown into the diaspora field as if it's only their issue. That's a very dangerous path. And they are trying to safeguard, in a way, according to their explanation, that the Republic of Armenia has to have good relations with Turkey, and we have to give up the issue in order to have good relations with Turkey. So that's the understanding they are trying to push into the minds of the people, whereas I would say the 80% of the population of Armenia are grandsons and granddaughters of genocide survivors. So it's being unjust to the people and to the memory of the survivors and those that have perished as a result of the state policy carried out by Turkey, Ottoman Turkey, in its attempt to just annihilate all the Armenian population in its own homeland. But the danger of it is that by playing the Turkish card, we see the Turkish stance being changed into total rejection of any genocide election, which was
maximalism.
not the case. Which was not the case before 2018, as we saw that the gradient acceptance in different formula, trying to make it more comprehensive to their own public and I would say digestible for their foreign policy and foreign stance. And now it's totally being erased, and we're back to, I would say, 1990 positions in that sense. And it's a very dangerous thing because it doesn't achieve anything. It is an attempt to change the Armenian identity, part of which is the remembrance and the call for justice. It is part of the identity of the Armenian people, and the whole action taken as part of the general policy carried out by the current administration is to kind of reformulate what we understand under an Armenian in order to satisfy the demands of our neighbors for the pursuit of the so-called peace agreement and achievement of stability and peace in the region. But that is not going to be the case because you cannot change that. You cannot delete the memory of people. You cannot change the identity and say, just forget it happened and go on and live and have your burgers and the pizzas and be happy with that. It doesn't work like that, especially in our region where your neighbors haven't given up their aggressive policies and vice versa. They are continuing their genocidal policies in different forms and shapes. So this is what they are attempting to do. They are trying to delete the memory, change the identity to open up the way for the people to say, okay, we can live together. Let's forget about what happened. Let's turn the page and be happy just simply because the border is open and we can trade with Turkey.
Ambassador, after nearly 3 decades in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you left the MFA. What were the circumstances around it? Did you leave voluntarily?
No, I was unexpectedly recalled after the elections in 2021, and I wasn't even given the explanation why I was recalled. And since my being back, there was not even a discussion with the foreign minister, not any consideration of what and why happened. I had met with the advisor to the foreign minister in January of 2022. So it's over a year and a half now. And I asked, actually, can you give me the explanation? What was the reason? And they said, oh, I don't know. And that was the end of the conversation. I'm still legally, because our law requires certain actions before you can fully release a career diplomat, because I'm a career diplomat. But it's coming to the end very soon, in 2-3 months. So then, according to the law, they will just discharge me without any questions and any legal actions being taken. So I would say that I have my guess and I have my understanding why it was done, but nobody in a clear statement told me why and what.
Interesting. Okay, let's look back to May of 2018 when Nikol Pashinyan was sworn in as Prime Minister of Armenia. What were your impressions of Pashinyan's movement at the time?
I had very negative opinion of the whole thing going on, and one of the first things that I said to my colleagues and to the people around me and to my family members that this whole thing is done to actually give up Karabakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, and just simply satisfy the Western desire to close the issue.
So it was clear to you from that moment on that the agenda included essentially surrendering Karabakh?
Yes, for me, that was clear. That was my understanding, that the whole thing was actually based on the changing the geopolitical structure of the region, for which Nagorno-Karabakh conflict was a very dangerous point if it was not resolved, and resolved according to the Azeri-Turkish desires.
Ms. Ambassador, on this topic, from 2018 until 2020, did you see anything that Armenia did in terms of policy or like a overt policy that would confirm your initial fears or beliefs? Some things that publicly you can talk about, obviously. What actions of the Armenian government in terms of Artsakh policy reconfirmed that belief and sense for you?
Well, of course, I cannot release legally. I cannot release anything related to my work that is not supposed to be public. I will simply based on the information that was public at the time. If you recall, until the spring of 2020, the foreign minister of Armenia was, and Nikol Pashinyan also, were telling that there are no negotiations going on. They're just
That's
talking.
right.
Yeah, you remember that. You cannot talk for hours, and knowing and being in negotiation process and knowing how things work. I know that talks are not simple talks. You don't go and say and how hello and where did you spend your vacation. It's negotiation. It's simply the Armenian public was kept in darkness of what is going on. And one of the first signs for me that they are giving up Karabakh, when they released, I think it was in the summer of 2020, when they released the new security concept of Armenia, and where they changed the term Republic of Artsakh into simple Artsakh. I think there was a lot of criticism coming from the opposition groups, and they say, well, this is the way we're say it's the same thing, but it was not the same thing. When we first wrote the security concept of Armenia, it was not accidental that we specifically mentioned the Republic of Artsakh, because that was the status that was given to Artsakh. And when they just gave up that and changed into simple Artsakh, that was another sign for me that they are consistently going towards giving up Artsakh. Well, you remember their rhetoric at the time and his expression that Artsakh is Armenia and full stop. That was also the red light for me, that he's giving the reason or argumentation to Azerbaijan to instigate military actions against Karabakh. Because if you want to state that Karabakh is independent, etc., you don't go and give reasons for your opponent to use it to achieve his or her own purposes. That was another sign. And one of the signs that I also saw along that way that was done publicly, when they changed the position that we had before, that we have to ensure the status of Nagorno-Karabakh Republic being accepted, which would guarantee the security of people, the rights and security of people. They just changed it into security and the rights of people, leaving outside the self-determination and the status issue. That was the major shift that actually made it clear for us that there is a big shift in the position, and then that was just simply to satisfy certain circles' interests in pushing back Artsakh into Azerbaijan. So those elements were clear guiding signals for me that this is not simply mistakes being done, but this is a policy being pursued according to a certain plan.
So your position on this is clear in terms of the Artsakh issue. Do you think that this regime was aware that it was walking into a war?
Yes.
I want to ask it, essentially like Hitler's famous or infamous quote, when diplomacy ends, war begins. Did they do anything to prevent Armenia from going into war? Or I don't want to fuel any conspiracy theories, but how could the war be averted, if at all? And what diplomatic actions or policies failed in that happening?
Yeah, of course, when diplomacy fails, military actions begin. But when you do not actually carry out any diplomatic effort, you give a green light to war immediately. And if that is done purposefully, then it's an open door to defeat and to humiliation, which we suffered during the war and after the war. I actually didn't look into the issues more closely, because usually diplomats deal with foreign affairs, external policies. They don't go deep into the internal ones because first, you don't have that much time. Secondly, as diplomat, you have to be neutral. You cannot be politicized. And you try to guarantee your objectivity in understanding things and serving your state, not the current government or whatever political party is in charge. So I started looking into the things more closely after the war, because whatever I had the understanding, I wanted to see whether that was actually can be evidentially proved by the statements, by other things that happened or were passed as decisions, as government decisions during that period. And I started to chart down the developments as chronological and things, and trying to connect the points. And after a while, I came across a document that I mentioned several times in my different interviews, which was the letter of the current Prime Minister to the NATO Secretary General, that was written in 2019, in the spring of May, if I'm not mistaken, or June in 2019, and was referring to the meeting that they had at the end of 2018, in December, when he visited the headquarters. Initially, the letter was labeled as a false one, but after the war, when you compared what the letter was saying and what actually happened on the ground, I understood that the letter was a real one. It was simply labeled as such to take it out of the public opinion and not to jeopardize the plans that they are following. And in the letter, it was clear that they had agreed to give up Karabakh, all the surrounding areas, plus 50% of Nagorno-Karabakh, under the understanding that the NATO, that means the Western countries, would guarantee that the rights and security of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, when I say rights and security of people, you understand that the terminology is currently being used all the time,
Yeah.
will be guaranteed, or they will have the influence or the pressure over Azerbaijan to secure that those rights and securities are guaranteed in what form, etc. It doesn't state.
Ambassador, that was exactly my question. I was wondering, how is it going to do this guarantee? How is it going to implement this guarantee?
Well, what we see, and we can judge from Aliyev's just recent statements, and from what we and many opposition members and political analysts, etc., were stating, there's not going to be any guarantee. I mean, it's a clear statement of genocidal policies. Karabakh without any Armenians, the policies that the current Azerbaijani president father was carrying out, and he continued to carry out. So there is no secret there. And any statement, any understanding that any guarantees can be provided to secure the normal living and status of Artsakhi Armenians under any Azerbaijani rule is just I would say a wishful thinking without any realistic possibility of coming true.
But did any Western countries promise to the Pashinyan government that they would be providing some kind of forces, some kind of observers who would be, let's say, protecting the rights and security of the Gharabakhzi people?
Well, probably they have given some promises which they cannot keep right now because they are too busy with Ukraine.
Right.
Apparently, and economically and militarily, they are stretching their resources. So it's a different story, and they are trying to push the current prime minister to fulfill his promises, which included actually driving out the Russians from this region in exchange for what? NATO forces, and under NATO forces, the Turkish forces will appear as peacekeepers. Does anybody think that the Turkish forces will protect the Armenians in the region?
And of course, none of this has been shared with the Armenian people.
No, but besides, we saw how they protected the Armenians 100 years ago. We saw how they protected the Armenians in 1918. We saw how they protected the Armenians in Nakhichevan. We saw how they protected the Armenians in Baku, in Sumgait, and then you can go on. All the 100 years is full of these protections, huh? So this kind of protection nobody needs. And I think that the EU so-called monitors are here with the purpose and understanding that at a certain point they might turn into some kind of a EU peacekeeping force, but we know that no peacekeeping force can stop any aggressive military action from Azerbaijan supported by Turkey, especially when Turkey is a NATO ally, a very protected and very cherished NATO ally, and actually the NATO tool for changing different regimes in different parts of the Middle East and the Caucasus. And current administration of Turkey is just pushing its own pan-Turkic policies, which I am sure West thinks it's okay as long as it pushes the Russians out of the region and succeeds in deconstructing the Russian Federation and also attempting to attack Iran and trying to dismantle the Iranian and dissolve it into different parts. And then they think they will be able to probably restrict Turkey. Excuse me, nobody can restrict Turkey. We know how the Turkish policy works, huh? They sit on different chairs and take advantage of all the situation.
Since his defeat in the 44-day war, Pashinyan has at times claimed that Armenia agreed to handing Artsakh to Azerbaijan with the signing of the Alma Ata Declaration back in 1991. He has also claimed the same thing about Armenia agreeing to hand over Artsakh by signing the Madrid Principles more recently.
Yeah.
You mentioned Foreign Minister Vartan Oskanian. He has publicly and vehemently rebutted Pashinyan's assertions and has also said that he offered to Pashinyan and his administration to discuss and explain the details of these negotiations, but Pashinyan rejected everything prior to 2018 and said he would start from his own starting point. What are your thoughts about Pashinyan's claims about the Alma Ata, Madrid, and prior administrations having agreed to hand Artsakh over to Azerbaijan? Do you think these are real assertions?
No, they are not valid, and I will explain it to you why. First of all, when a state joins any international organization, in their constitution or the code, it clearly states that they agree to the territorial integrity, sovereignty, etc., and all the principles of international law. And that's a general statement that is put in all international organizations, constitutions, and codes or charters. That's a general statement which simply states all the principles of international law on an equal basis. So you can equally state that when we joined the WHO, for example, we recognize the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. He also states that all the former presidents have agreed to territorial integrity of Azerbaijan, but he forgets to mention the most important thing that they said, but Nagorno-Karabakh is not part of Azerbaijan.
That's right.
And that's a big issue that he's leaving out, trying to state that he hasn't done anything new, it just was there, he's just simply fulfilling it. But that's false. As we refer to Alma Ata Declaration, in Alma Ata Declaration itself, nothing says that you recognize the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan according to this and this and that. There's nothing like that in the text of the Alma Ata Declaration. It was just stamping the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Moreover, the Supreme Council of the Republic of Armenia in 1992, when it verified the declaration, and upon verification of declaration, the declaration became in force for Armenia. It became valid for Armenia. It had issued 10 reservations, and one of the reservations clearly stated that Nagorno-Karabakh cannot be considered as part of Azerbaijan, and Nagorno-Karabakh can apply for the membership of the CIS that was formed after Alma Ata Declaration, as a political unit that actually exercised its right for independence according to the laws of the Soviet Union in force and in place at that time. So that claiming that Alma Ata Declaration gave him the reason for recognition of Azerbaijan's territorial integrity is a false statement. Now let's go to Madrid Principles. Anyone who reads the Madrid Principles can see that there are three main principles put there. And self-determination is one of the equal principles that has to be considered as part of the solution for the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. So you cannot leave it out. What the current administration is doing is just leaving it out and only referring to territorial integrity and actually interpreting it only according to Azerbaijani interpretations, not according to the Armenian positions for the last 28 years. And that's the main reason why he's trying to put into the minds of people that this is not me doing, this is others have done, I'm just fulfilling what they have agreed to, and you have no other choice but to agree to this solution because we are weak, we cannot do anything, we have no army, we cannot protect ourselves, there are no guarantors, and this is the only way we can try to safeguard the Republic of Armenia and save it from the destruction. So this is the main idea that he's trying to push into people's minds and kind of make them agree to the plans that he has agreed to, as has taken commitment, and now trying to enforce it into the Armenian people living in Armenia and in Artsakh.
Ms Aghajanian, the war obviously affected all of us in a very severe way. As the war ended, we still experience the shock and disbelief. We're still in that stage, I would say. On the night of the signing of the November 9-10, 2020 trilateral ceasefire statement, people stormed the government building and parliament. For a week, neither Pashinyan nor his civil contract parliamentarians could be found anywhere. Can I ask what that time period looked like from inside the MFA? How did diplomats react? and what changes took place. There's also this episode where one of the deputy foreign ministers, I forget who, said that they had no idea that something was going to be signed. I believe it was Shavash Kocharian. What can you tell us about what was going on inside the MFA at the time?
Well, I would say that most of the MFA people didn't know that something like that was going to be signed, except for the minister and the deputy ministers, because it was done in a very confidential manner. And I think they didn't share it with Shavash Kocharian, knowing his clear positions, that he would definitely go against it. And it came as a total shock to us, honestly, especially for diplomats that have worked throughout all these years protecting and defending our interests in all arenas. It really came as a shock. And for me, it was clear, understand. Well, as I said, during the war itself, I understood that it is done purposefully. This defeat is being carried out purposefully. It was like an organized chaos that was leading to the losing of the war, and every single evidence coming from the battlefield was proving me that that was done in an organized manner. All this defection was done in an organized manner. So for me, despite the fact that I was understanding that they are fulfilling their plans, the whole fact of the defeat, and especially the way that ceasefire was put into place and the hardness by which they started giving the territories to Azerbaijan, that was a real shock to me. Because when you think of a ceasefire, it's a different thing when you see that the whole country, that even areas where there was not a single centimeter of loss is being just given to Azerbaijan, and that is resulting in total defenseless position for Artsakh and for Armenia. That was a total shock for me. So, and I think for most of the people, that was also a shock. And I think they are trying to keep that shock alive in a way for the people in order for them not to fully understand what is being done until they fulfill their plans as they have committed to.
Ms Aghajanian, when the war started, the 44-day war, was the government expecting or anticipating something like that from the intelligence information that it had?
According to my conversations with different people, they knew, even some of them knew the exact date that the war was going to start. But if you relied on the analysis of different experts, they were even giving the start of the war in May of 2020, expecting it to happen. Simply the COVID situation delayed it in a way. But the government knew, the army knew about it. Even according to the information from different military people, military experts, there was even kind of a alert, like in the US, they say orange alert, etc., given on September 25th.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day, they just discarded it. And the US Embassy also gave its warning to its own citizens not to go to these areas on September 25th. So it was not a surprise for anyone that war is will be launched very soon. Also, given the accumulation of the military personnel and the equipment along the borderline from the Azerbaijani side. So there was not a secret that the war is going to start. And according to the conversations that I had, and also that the interviews that I heard, open interviews from different people, they knew that 27th or close to that date, the war will start.
Okay, now let's go back to the post-war period. At one point, when Foreign Minister Zohrab Mnatsakanian resigned, 4 of his deputy foreign ministers also resigned en masse. At this time, there were a lot of concerns that the ministry no longer had qualified or trained diplomats and staff to carry on its mission. Can you share with us any information about that episode? Why did Mr. Mnatsakanian resign? How would you evaluate his performance before and during the war? As much as you can say in a professional manner. Let's start with that.
Well, I cannot tell why he resigned. It was his decision. He gave an explanation, but I don't believe to that. But I can tell why different people didn't agree to take up the position of the deputy ministers, because they didn't want to have anything to do with this government and the policies they were carrying out, simply. Because when you go to the position of the deputy foreign minister, you take up some responsibilities as member of that political group. You stop being a career diplomat and serving only to the state. It's kind of a hybrid position in that state. So you have to agree to the policies that that administration is carrying out. And many diplomats didn't want to have anything to do with these deceitful policies that were aiming at giving up Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenian interests. So it became obvious for many of them that that's the policy the administration is pursuing. But eventually they decided to go along, because the foreign ministry is creating a lot of problems for them. The foreign ministry wasn't agreeing to go along with giving up the Armenian interest that they have pursued for several decades. And eventually they decided to have their own foreign minister that will simply act according to their wishes and wills.
Can you clarify, I guess, which minister you're talking about?
Well, Zareh Sinanyan agreed to work with that administration, and we saw the result.
Mm-hmm.
Right. He also resigned.
He also resigned, yeah. Apparently, probably being newly appointed as deputy foreign minister when war was already launching, he was not that familiar with the policies that were carrying out by the administration. As he started working more closely with them, he realized what is going on, and eventually he resigned.
I understand that they brought him in from Mexico, so
Yes,
somewhere
they
in
brought
South
him from
America.
Mexico in the middle of October, and his son also was in the battlefield. He was there. He was wounded very heavily. Luckily, he survived. But he was not that familiar, and he didn't have time to go into the details. Apparently, when he agreed to, I can guess simply that when he agreed to become the foreign minister, they have given some promises to him, which definitely they didn't keep. And over the time, he understood what is going on, and he resigned.
So you're describing an organization that's sort of deliberately being, I guess, manipulated, and there are some artificial walls, I guess, within the foreign ministry where some people are privy to what's going on, some aren't. After the war, we saw many diplomats resign. Others, such as yourself, I'm assuming because you're still sort of, carrying on your mission. What can you tell us about the makeup of the foreign ministry today? From one perspective, there's this notion that anyone who serves the current regime is complicit in whatever they do. And others say that, the job of a diplomat is important, and there are some nuance in terms of what can be done and cannot be done and can be considered as being complicit. Where does one's responsibility as a diplomat end and that of a citizen begin?
Well, for some diplomats that are currently in place, especially in very key positions, like those that are constantly at risk, it's good that we have our career diplomats still there, because then they can try to at least change certain things and not to give up everything at one go. But I would state that it's a personal choice in a way. Personal choice whether you keep your principal position or you try to go along fully with the administration desires, or you try to maneuver in between, trying to serve your country as much as possible and not to allow all the issues simply be killed the way the current administration wants to be done. So it's different things going on there. It's good that we still have very skilled and very experienced diplomats, but I can imagine how hard it is for them, being in their positions, to try to maneuver and to actually serve the country and the Armenian interests the way it has to be served. Of course, they have certain restrictions, but they try to make best out of it. So I can imagine how difficult it is for them.
Thanks. Yeah.
But there are not that many.
We are now apparently in the midst of a so-called great game for control and influence over Armenia and the South Caucasus. Immediately after the war, the Pashinyan government made it very difficult to evaluate the direction of Armenia's geopolitical vector. One day it was praise for Russia and strong pro-Russian sentiments and statements. Other days we would see the overtures towards the West. In geopolitics, they say that countries don't have friends, they have interests or national interests. Can you boil it down for us? What are Armenia's fundamental national interests?
Well, I can tell what I understand as Armenia's fundamental interests, and it's serving Armenia's interest in providing the best opportunities for security for Armenia and Artsakh, and for economic and political development in cooperation with all the countries that want to have strong Armenia as part of the region. But that's not what is going on right now, regretfully. Probably there have been some promises made by the West when this administration was brought to power, with the possibility of creating some kind of a pinky picture of the future for them with the support of the West. And they continue to serve their purposes in gradually diverting Armenia's security architecture away from Russia and towards the West. First under the umbrella of the European Union, and then totally away to NATO and the US umbrella. But the thing is that in our region, this kind of diversions are simply killing the security of the region. And what we are seeing is that we have become the conflicting platform for the Western, Russian, Iranian, and Eastern actors, which is very dangerous for us. So this is what we should have avoided, not only avoided and not allowed to happen, but we allowed it to happen by the policies carried out by our government. And the current policies that have actually started in 2018 and are becoming more and more obvious nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Serge Sargsyan's administration had a policy of complementarity, if I recall, balancing our relations with our Eastern and Western partners. Should Armenia look east? Should it look west? Should it look both ways? Are there other vectors to consider in our national interests?
Well, I would correct you in a way, because Kocharyan's foreign policy was called complementary policy, was carrying out the policy of complementarity.
Yeah, it started under Oskanian, you're right.
Yeah, at that time they were saying, oh, how are you going to balance it, whether it's like 50% of this, 50% of that? And we said, no, it's we take Armenia's interest and we see which of the countries can help us in serving Armenia's interest best in that particular area. And we go along with that. If we have, for example, worked with the Western countries in democracy building, human rights, rule of law, etc., we have worked militarily with Russia and with the countries to the east and also with NATO. So we have been successful in kind of bringing all the best from the world to serve our interest without choosing this side or the other side. And instead of making them the competing parts here, we were trying to make them the cooperating parts in Armenia. And we were successful up until 2018. Of course, we had our difficult periods. Of course, we had periods when we had to clearly and unequivocally explain our partners in the West or in the East why exactly we're doing this and why exactly we're doing that. But because we were considered to be a very trusted partner, our word was very valued and taken for granted. Now the situation has changed because we have changed the way we approach to the things. Instead of bringing them to cooperate to serve our interest, we are serving their interests in the region. And that is what is the danger here. Then you have become an object of discussion rather than the subject of the discussion. We have become the part which they don't take as serious as they used to during the previous decades. They don't take our position, and they know that they can pressurize and get their way, which was not the case before. And that is the danger. As I said, Armenia is gradually becoming the conflicting field where they try to serve their interests rather than help us serve Armenia's interests through cooperative and collaborative mechanisms.
Everybody talks about football analogies. Some people say we have become the field. I was thinking of us as the football itself. Both teams get to kick us around.
Yes.
I think we have gradually become the ball itself. Not even the football, smaller ping pong ball.
Right. Ms. Ambassador, a very naive probably question, but given the big conflict between Iran and at least some Western governments, can Armenia get closer to Iran without facing any sanctions today? Should we explore that opportunity? Is the current regime basically doing the best it can in that regard? And if it's not, what would be an alternative policy that you could suggest that would be in the best interests of Armenia?
Well, I would give you an example from our own 30-year independence history. The sanctions against Iran are not new. They have been in place for decades. And until 2018, Armenia was successful in developing economic and other ties with Iran without being target of the sanctions. So there are ways to do that, because Armenia was following only the sanctions that were authorized by the UN, which are actually the legal sanctions that are internationally authorized. The unilateral sanctions by different governments, Armenia has no obligation to follow. So there's not even a possibility for Armenia to actually, if you follow your legal obligations under international law, you don't have to follow these sanctions. Of course, the US has its own way of trying to influence countries to follow its own way, but we managed to circumvent those and not become the target of sanctions before 2018. The policy changed in 2018, and I think Mr. Bolton's arrival and his statement are clear indication of what they had meant at the time. And the government itself is simply following the Western policies against Iran, regretfully following, and not even utilizing all the possibilities that exist for the development of bilateral relations with Iran. So it's with current administration, it's out of question.
We brushed on the topic of genocide a little earlier in the show. We should note that for over 100 years, the West has made many promises to Armenia, most of which have not been kept. In general, the West cannot exert influence in the South Caucasus except through Turkey, and we know that those relations are blocked. What are your thoughts about unblocking relations with Turkey? Specifically, I'd like to refer to the so-called Turkish-Armenian normalization process as pursued by this government. Is it going to be beneficial for Armenia?
First of all, we have to achieve that normalization of relations. There have been several attempts in the past, but at that period, Armenia was on a stronger position, not as a weaker player in the game. And in those circumstances, we were pursuing the policy that the normalization of relations between Armenia and Turkey cannot be dictated by a third party. meaning no relations with Azerbaijan, can be the decisive point in the normalization of relations with Turkey. And that was an accepted formula until 2018. But currently, Turkey is explicitly even stating that if you do this and that for Azerbaijan, then we can consider the normalization of relations. So the Azerbaijani positions and Azerbaijani issues have become the condition for the normalization of relations, in addition to those that Turkey have historically presented as part of the negotiation process. So instead of easing the process, it has complicated it further. So right now, the way that things are going, I don't see any possibility of normalization of relations. And that's why the current government is trying to give up Karabakh, to give up the genocide issue, the recognition of genocide. Then they will give up the sovereignty over the corridor, the routes, without even calling it corridor. Then they will try to give multiple possibilities to Turkey in order to normalize the relations. If they go on and adhere to the calls coming from, I would say, threats coming from Turkey, they might even attempt to demolish the monument for Nemesis people. Apparently, after that, they will ask for demolition of the genocide memorial. So it will go on and on and on and on under the concept of normalization of relations with Turkey. And the West isn't going to do anything because, as I said in the beginning of our interview, the West values Turkey as the sword by which it interferes into the works and dealings of different countries and try to change regimes in different countries in the Middle East and in the Caucasus. So it's an influence actor for the West, especially for the US and NATO.
Mm-hmm.
So they are not going to have any destruction in their relations for the purpose of saving the Armenian people or serving their interests.
Thank you for that. And for our last set of questions, Ms Aghajanian, on May 28th, which is a holiday in Armenia, you and a number of other citizens joined forces to announce the founding of a new movement called Mother Armenia, Mayr Hayastan. Can you, in your own words, describe what are the movement's goals? I understand it's been advertised as above the political spectrum, but what do you hope to achieve with this effort and with your involvement in it?
It was symbolic that the launch of the movement was actually done on the day of the establishment of the First Republic, and it regretfully coincided with these threats coming from the Azerbaijani president, making it more valuable in the sense that we need some kind of a public movement that would address and try to unify the different sectors of the public in Armenia. It's not an apolitical movement, It's a political movement, but it's not depending on political parties. So political parties are not part of the movement. It's simply individuals and public organizations that can be part of the movement. Members of political parties themselves as individuals can work with the movement, but they cannot become part of the movement itself. They can support the purposes and goals of the movement. They can do their work on their side, but because it's not a movement based on political parties like we had the previous movements, it is trying to organize the different sectors of the public, different professionals who are very concerned about the situation of the country, who want to stop this destruction of the country and dissolution of the Republic of Armenia, who want to stop this hand that is trying to give up Nagorno-Karabakh and actually trying to solve this issue at the expense of the Armenian people, which we considered will give the reason and will pave the way for the second wave of genocide. And all these people that have the same understanding of the situation in the country and the same concerns and the same goal of first saving the Republic of Armenia, saving Artsakh as part of homeland for the Armenians of Artsakh, and removing the current administration, because that's the reason we cannot stop this process, and paving the way for new possibilities and opportunities for the country to recover and for the people to stand up on their feet again, feel strong, and try to build the country back to its strength and to the new possibilities that the current geopolitical changes in the world are giving us. So if they share these purposes, then they can be part of the movement and we can work together. And I stress here we, because it's not only the people or the organization itself that will do the work. We will try to bring up all the forces around us and make it a real people's movement trying to save the country, save Armenia and Armenians. Like we had in the beginning of the Karabakh movement, the same understanding, because deriving from the lessons of the previous movements, it seems that that is the only possibility to bring the different sectors, the people that have different understanding of the possibilities to go ahead, to those that do not want to deal with any political party because they have lost, I would say, they have lost their respect and trust in the public in general. So it's very difficult to regain that trust there. So in order not to go into this long political party development process, and given the very stressful and very decisive moment in our history, we decided to go with this kind of a movement in trying to become the organizing kind of the core around which the people and the movements will gather, different people and different organizations will gather in going ahead and trying to save the country.
Great, thank you for that. I know it's been only a few days, but what can you tell us about any sort of momentum that you pick up? Because we are working against the clock, as we all know. Have you been in consultations, for instance, with any political parties? I know you said that you try to not include political parties, but what would being part of the movement look like? Do you have a set of principles that I, as a citizen, can sign, or a political party can sign under, and in that way join the movement? And what specific tactics, public tactics, are you planning that you can talk about right now?
Well, different organizations can, as I said, different organizations can join our movement, and they can join by accepting the declaration that we have issued and accepting the purposes of the movement. So that's one way. Individuals, of course, cannot just simply accept the declaration. They can join by stating that they share the goals and purposes of the movement, and then ask what kind of work and what kind of activities they can carry out to support the work of the movement. So there are different ways, but of course they have to come out publicly and state their position in that sense, like stance, whether as an organization joining the movement and joining the declaration, or as individuals joining the goals or sharing the goals and purposes of the organization. Currently, I mean, there's a lot of interest, and we keep getting it from all the people, individuals, organizations, political, professional groups, etc., because everybody is concerned. If a year ago, for some, there were many questions, 2 years ago, for many, there were a lot of questions. Now it has become very obvious where this current administration is taking us, and more than 90% of the people do not share that kind of way. They don't see the future of Armenia in the framework that the current administration is trying to build for the country. So we have our pages in Facebook, etc. They can go in different social media pages. They can go and join. There is a phone number that they can address their questions to if they want to know more about it, and if they can suggest their like activities, etc. that they want to do. We don't want to tell people what to do all the way, huh? We want them also to have ownership in the process. They have to be part of the process. It's very important because it's not the responsibility only of the movement. If we want to be people's movement, they have to have their ownership in the process.
Mm-hmm.
They have to bring their ideas, to bring their, I don't know, surrounding the concerns of their either professional groups or the part of the country that they are living in or the profession that they are working in. And then we will try to address those issues together. So this is the main purpose. We have to work together. We're not in a position to say, okay, you have started a movement, you go, we'll see what we will do and whether we join or not. No, we have tried that with the political parties, the movements before. We have come to the understanding that the situation in the country is so serious that everybody has to work towards taking the country out of this demise and give it the possibility, as I said, to stand up again and gradually become stronger. And if we start the struggle for that, then we will have our friends joining us from all the parts of the world, I'm sure, be it on individual levels or on country levels, because we see the signals, we see the interest, but the current administration is simply pursuing its policies, which we consider to be against the interests of both Armenia and Artsakh and the Armenian people in general all over the world. And in order to change the situation, we have to change the administration. Unless we do, it's simply impossible to shift the path and change the direction.
The key will be in galvanizing and mobilizing the people into action.
Yes.
That has been the most difficult thing over the last 2 years.
It's the most difficult thing, and we know that different centers of influence are working, and a lot of people are working not to allow that to happen. So we are working against the big machinery that is actually in a manipulative way trying to achieve the purposes that it has and for which this administration has been brought to power. But as I said today to one of my colleagues, throughout history, we have proved that we can achieve impossible things through unity and through persistence. And I think the last occasion that we did was in 92, 94, when we were fighting against a bigger force called the Azerbaijani army, and we were under blockade, total blockade, as many people would remember, after the destructive earthquake that left 1/3 of the country in ruins, after the situation where the whole economy was stopped at total halt. There was no economic development, and I was even reminding them that at a very long period of time, we were even getting the grain, the wheat grain, by planes coming to Armenia in order for people not to starve. So we have seen those days, and we have achieved our goals through unity, through consolidation, and through persistence. So we have to follow that path. And I think when the people stand up as one, there's no possibility for anyone to force us to go the wrong way. So we have to do that. And in order to have that mobilization, we have to work with everybody. Everybody that is sharing the same concerns and sharing the same purposes and goals that the movement has put forward.
All right, we're going to leave it there for today. Thank you, Ambassador Aghajanian, for sharing your thoughts today with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity again.
All right, that's our show. We hope you found it useful. Please find us on social media and follow us everywhere you get your Armenian news. We'll talk to you soon.